This is BBC News, and now a weekly dynamic discussion on the US presidency, the president's path.
Hi guys, I've just spent my morning researching alligators. How fascinating. And fun fact, there are more alligators in Louisiana than there are in Florida, which was, of course, the focus of alligators this week with Alligator Alcatraz, where you were burned.
They were, and alligators are actually in my top three fears, along with crocodiles and earthquakes, which is unrelated. But
All
yeah,
rational things to fear.
yeah.
So we should just explain that Alligator Alcatraz is the name for this new migrant detention facility that's been opened up just this past week in Florida. And it's meant to be something of a model for further detention facilities for undocumented migrants who are detained and then set for deportation. Bernie, I'm curious, what was it like walking through that facility with the president? Just what was the feel? Because it was built so quickly.
Yeah, it was built in just 6 days, and it's clean and it's air conditioned, but it is very, very Spartan. We at one point the president walked with us behind him, walked through kind of a housing tent that they're going to use to put the migrants, and it's essentially cages, just various blocks of cages with bunk beds inside them and very little else. I think the president and the administration and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis that was there as well, they're very proud of that because they see kind of the harshness of it as almost the point. I mean, besides being, an unpleasant place to be detained, it really is surrounded by miles and miles and miles of very harsh Everglades where there's pythons and alligators. President Trump said if anyone tries to escape, they would be met with cops in the form of alligators. It's something they're putting on T-shirts. The White House has made little videos of dancing alligators. One influencer who was there was given a Alligator Alley hat as a bit of merch for his visit. So that they're very proud of how remote and Spartan this facility is.
I mean, it is quite remarkable as a concept when you think about it, that you would put people who have come to your country seeking refuge, seeking asylum, many of them, and yes, some have come for nefarious reasons, but it would appear to be in the minority from the statistics that we have, and we don't have many statistics. But this, concept of the alligator cops, and as you're saying, Bernie, the merch there. The White House tweeted an image at one point of alligators wearing ICE agent baseball caps as well, and some of the PACs that fundraise for President Trump have been selling various memorabilia with the president on top of an alligator, and like really curious stuff that I think if you'd seen in a TV show a few years ago, you would have said, oh, that's taken things way too far.
I really wonder about how this will play with people as well. We had a few Republican strategists on our program through the course of the week. And if the Trump administration is saying this is the model, will it be seen as cruel and inhumane to talk about dangerous wildlife as a deterrent, even if you are talking about undocumented migrants with criminal records? It is, really something that a lot of people will question. And, as we've talked about the numbers in polling on immigration, of course, there has been a lot of support for President Trump's actions to crack down on crossings at the southern border. There is somewhere we do see a good deal of support, and we can talk about that. But if we talk specifically about some of the deportation schemes that we've seen across the country, we talked in previous pods about the fact that we are seeing some of these images of people getting caught up in ICE raids that shouldn't be. Some were citizens or those who are here perhaps undocumented but have families, have been working. And you pair that with the image of these videos of these alligators wearing ICE hats. I do wonder how that will play with people, and if you'll see some of the support start to dissipate a bit.
They're already talking about building a second one of these in northern Florida as well. This one is very much seen as the prototype. Bernd, you were there at the press conference that the president held there with the Secretary of Homeland Security, with the governor of Florida and a host of others. They all seemed very much on board and actually excited by this concept.
They are very excited, and they're already looking at similar facilities in different states. I mean, obviously the environment will be very different, but for example, Louisiana has already expressed an interest in building a similar facility. And for the administration, I mean, part of it is just the speed at which deportations can happen from this facility in the Everglades. It's built on a runway, which means that once people are processed, and they'll be processed by members of Florida National Guard who are being deputized as immigration judges, which is again an unprecedented thing. So it's kind of a quick turnaround time from arrival to being processed to being flown back to your home country. But more than that, they see it as kind of repeatedly said so that they see it as kind of a deterrent in that it's so unpleasant the thought of being at such a place that people who are thinking of coming to the US might not, because you might end up in Everglades Alcatraz, and people that are here might self-deport, and that's something they're really banking on because it kind of allows them to build up those deportation numbers without the logistics of having to actually do so.
We should say that the measures in place so far have acted as a deterrent, haven't they? I mean, we saw statistics just recently that the number of border crossings are down 93 or 94% year on year. And the president has been lauding this statistic of zero undocumented migrants being, as he puts it, released into the United States in the last month. Which, is a kind of unprecedented number to see. But that's a lot to do with how the system is set up here in the US and some of the other actions that the president has taken to reverse what was happening. But you can't move away from the fact that their measures have been acting as deterrents and have dramatically reduced the numbers of people trying to come to the US.
I think what's a little less unclear is how much that impact that's had on self-deportations. At one point at the facility, I asked Trump and Kristi Noem how many people have actually self-deported because they kept saying many, many. She started with a figure of a few 100,000, then she ended on 1 million, and then she kind of pivoted and said, well, we don't actually know because not everyone's self-deporting through, official government channels. Some people might just be leaving. So they haven't really been able to kind of put that forward as evidence with numbers behind it to say that these measures are making people leave. I think it's kind of one of the gaping holes that remain in the public messaging about this.
And underlying all of this in building up these facilities like Alligator Alcatraz, perhaps another in northern Florida, and further in states like Louisiana, is the question of just capacity. And our colleagues at CBS News, Camilo Montoya Galvez, who's done really fantastic work on immigration reporting. He had an exclusive where I just was looking. He said that U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE, is holding around 59,000 detainees in facilities across the country. And that would, if confirmed, be a record high. So the most number of detainees. And if you look at what Camilo said that ICE's detention level was, it's on paper over 140% over capacity. So that means that they are desperately searching for more facilities to be able to house some of the undocumented migrants who are apprehended, and before obviously that they can be deported. Now, obviously, as you said, Bernd, the fact that they are deputizing some of these officers to be immigration judges points to the fact that they know there has been this criticism about due process. So they're trying to pack that, if you will, all in one. But I did find it interesting in this reporting from Camilo. He said that the federal statistics show that nearly half, around 47% of those currently detained by ICE lack a criminal record. And this is, again, going to the point of the question, if we talk about places that are as inhospitable as Alligator Alcatraz and similar facilities, these are meant in the Trump administration's narrative to point to what they say are undocumented migrants with criminal records. They call them the worst of the worst, murderers and so on and so forth. If, again, we're starting to see more and more undocumented migrants without criminal records, without criminal convictions, held in these facilities, this could be something where they do face some pushback.
And I think the White House is kind of aware of some of the criticism. I mean, over the last several weeks and months, we've seen Trump kind of soften his tone, at least about, for example, migrants who work in agricultural sectors. We've seen kind of it become much less firm about what their future is. And I think even, some of the the MAGA base is very aware of how reliant some states, agricultural sectors, for example, are on undocumented labor. So you're starting to see kind of them go back to that language from the beginning of the administration in terms of criminals and gang members that I think we had kind of seen float away a little bit in the interim.
I would encourage everyone to check out the official statistics on the ICE website, though, everyone who's watching or listening in, because it's very straightforwardly laid out there in terms of the number of people who have been, the word they use is removals for deportations. And they have it color coded in terms of those who had a criminal conviction, some other issue to do with the law, or some other immigration issue, which, by virtue of the fact that you were in this country without the correct paperwork, that's an illegal immigration issue. But the vast, vast majority go into that, immigration issue, not criminal conviction of the people who are removed from this country. So there isn't a clear pattern of that. And I suppose that's been the issue that people have had with many of these operations from the beginning, isn't it? That there isn't the statistical evidence there. Yes, there are some very extreme cases and some very, very extreme hard criminals and some awful things that have come before the courts, without doubt. But there are also a whole portion of people who don't fit into that category. But I was also trying to find the number of people who have been deported this year, to your point, Bernd, about that self-deported app as well, or self-deportation through the app. And the current figure on the ICE website says 47,879 people. So clearly that's an out-of-date figure based on what the administration is saying to us and based on the number of flights that we know have taken off to various places over the last few months. But it's just quite curious that they haven't been able to come up with that firm figure, a hard figure, as you were saying, Bernd, the secretary admitted to you the other day as well. And I suppose we should just explain to people self-deportation under this administration, could be viewed potentially as quite a lucrative option. And indeed, there's a whole page on the ICE website where they are encouraging people to do this. You get $1,000 and you also don't face the threat of never being allowed back into the US again. So that's why they're encouraging people to do that. But they use very strong language about if you don't self-deport, we will find you, we will come for you, we will remove you. You may not be removed immediately. You may spend several months in detention in a detention centre like Alligator Alcatraz or elsewhere, one presumes. And so they're very much trying to advertise and incentivize people to do this work for them, which feeds into that point of they just don't have the space to put what Stephen Miller's been asking for, 3,000 arrests per day of ICE agents.
The solutions that they've floated so far, besides these mega facilities, just really haven't worked out. Tom Homan, for example, in the past has said that you could house migrants, essentially renting out space in let's say, a county jail or a state prison, in which part of the facility will remain a prison and part will be an immigration detention facility. They've not been able to come up with the space through those much easier methods than building a completely new facility in the Everglades. They've just not been able to come up with a solution there. And I think, there's some frustration there, which, we've seen reporting about President Trump being frustrated at the numbers.
Well, we should say, one of the reasons that those numbers of the people arrested per day are lower than they want is simply because of what you pointed to earlier, Caitríona, is that the numbers at the southern border have fallen so precipitously, excuse me. That 6,000 Border Patrol apprehensions in June, that is a record low. And I think that, of course, means that there aren't as many people coming into the country to be apprehended and then deported. And it's important to note also what you pointed out, Caitríona, that Tom Homan made a big point, as the Trump administration has as well, that not a single migrant was released after being apprehended back into the country. And this is a major difference between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, where there was this catch and release scheme under the Biden administration. I remember being down in El Paso in 2022 when you saw these record numbers of migrants crossing. And most of the migrants I spoke to who had arrived there said, yes, we were apprehended as we saw in those images during the Biden administration, they would walk up to Border Patrol officials, hand themselves in more or less, be apprehended, detained, and then receive an immigration court hearing. And the vast majority of them, as we know, were headed to other parts of the country, even if they disclosed that and were given this immigration date for a court hearing in another part of the country. Many of them did not show up. They were either then with family or friends or had found work or whatever it may be. And the fact that they're not being released back into the country is one of the reasons that we've seen those numbers drop and a significant, for the Trump administration, victory. But I wonder what you guys think about this court ruling that we saw as well, that a federal judge blocked President Trump's directive actually to crack down on asylum at the southern border. I mean, this is again one of those federal judge versus the Trump administration conflicts. And basically, this judge is saying that the president doesn't have the authority to be able to proclaim that there is an invasion of illegal immigrants and use that to strip the rights to asylum at the southern border.
I think it's one that the White House was waiting for. We've said on this podcast before that this White House is essentially more prepared for legal challenges to their executive orders, for example, than they were in the first go. And they're very. I mean, I was speaking to some of them about this recently. They're very confident that upon appeals, especially after the recent Supreme Court ruling, that they'll eventually manage to make this stick. And now they get to talk about it as well. And this is, as we've also said, this is such a winning issue for Trump and the Republican Party electorally and politically that they're very happy to talk about this as much as possible.
I think this one is a little bit different because obviously we had that Supreme Court ruling last week that said that federal judges could not basically issue nationwide injunctions to stop the president and what he and his administration were trying to do. But it did leave one caveat, and that was where things were a class action and had been certified as a class action. And what the judge has done in this case is basically in the ruling that was issued this week saying that what the president and his team were trying to do was unconstitutional and went against existing immigration law. He's basically already said that people seeking asylum and seeking refuge in this country are a class for the purposes of this, that their number is so significant. So we've seen a lot of pushback from the White House saying, oh, how dare they do this because of the Supreme Court ruling last week. But actually the judge has done it in a way that is in line with that Supreme Court ruling by skipping ahead to that class action point. But, we will no doubt this is headed for the Supreme Court without question. I mean, we saw that really passionate arguments before the court on this case back in April, didn't we? And, even hypothetical questions being put forward about what if you were trying to shoot people that came over the border and like all kinds of really unpleasant situations being discussed. But essentially, the organisations who took the case, including the ACLU, were saying, no, the Constitution is clear on this, existing immigration is clear on this. And, you look at the Statue of Liberty in New York and you look at the poem that's written along the bottom of it there saying, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. I mean, it's the basis in a way of what America was built on, which is what this judge has found, that you can't deny people who are in desperate need the entitlement to seek asylum and to seek refuge, pending, of course, a process to go through and a decision to be made, and perhaps they stay, perhaps they don't. But that asylum process is a route to essentially getting a legal status and potentially citizenship here.
And some of the organizations that work with migrants are, their main point is this is also a violation of international law to turn people around in terms of asylum proceedings, because there's international agreements that
Exactly.
govern that, of which the U.S. is part. So I think this is something that's going to play out in court over the next few months or potentially longer. But the administration is, from their point of view, they're happy to fight this out in court and have this as kind of this is what we're doing.
It's so public again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah.
But it does, like, speaking about citizenship, we were talking about this, Sumi, weren't we, earlier? Like, it raises that other thing we saw this week, which was the discussion around wanting to remove the citizenship, denaturalize people, because the president and the administration feel they no longer deserve to be American citizens. And we heard that being said about Mamdani in New York, who will be contesting the mayoral elections there for the Democrats.
Yeah, this was a directive for the attorneys at the Department of Justice to prioritize denaturalization proceedings for naturalized citizens. So these are people who have come to the US and then applied for citizenship and been granted it. And these would then be prioritized if these naturalized citizens have committed crimes. But I found it interesting that there was also, I was seeing that there was a memo that lists a number of other qualifying crimes, including prioritizing the denaturalization for those who are facing, quote, pending criminal charges that have not yet secured a conviction. We know that's going to be a very, very tricky legal effort by the Trump administration. If someone has not been convicted of a crime but is facing criminal charges, we know you're innocent until proven guilty in this country. And for the Trump administration to say that those would be prioritized, it's hard to imagine that there would be much legal ground for them to stand on if someone is a naturalized citizen and has not been convicted of a crime. And it is important to note that this is not new. Donald Trump in his first term had created this special Justice Department division that was for looking at denaturalization. So this clearly has been a priority for him for some time. But I think, it has raised a lot of alarm bells for immigration advocates, but also for, civil liberties advocates here in the US who say this is a very questionable effort by the administration to pursue and seek actually prioritizing denaturalization.
And I mean, President Trump's comments about Mamdani, for example, seem to suggest kind of that this could be politicized, which I think really raised a lot of alarm bells. Past the legal issue of denaturalization in general, the possibility of people being denaturalized or looking for reasons to denaturalize someone because of some sort of political disagreement. I think that became such a big concern after he spoke about Mamdani.
Congressman Andy Ogles, who was a hard right congressman, he actually suggested that the Trump administration should look at stripping Zohran Mamdani of his citizenship because he pointed to lyrics from a rap song 8 years ago or so where he said they could be looked into for possible terrorist implications. And Caroline Leavitt, we know, was asked about this, the White House press secretary. She said, we'll look into it. I mean, whether there are actually grounds to even consider that is a completely different issue.
This week has been so kind of all-consuming on the domestic news front, hasn't it, for the president and all of the members of the Republican Party? But it feels like next week things are going to shift back to foreign policy with the visit of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House on Monday. Obviously, they want to celebrate, we're told, their successful strikes on Iran and the ceasefire deal that came from that, and also what the latest situation will be in Gaza and how they can move that forward.
And I think it's from the White House's perspective also kind of important to show that there's no daylight between the two men. Ahead of the Iran strike, there had been a lot of speculation that there was frustration with the Israeli side about Gaza and about Iran, which turned out not to be the case. But they still are very aware of what was being reported in terms of the relationship between the two men, and this will be his third visit in what, six months, which
just
is
less than 6 months,
more.
yeah.
Indeed, and a bit of a test for President Trump as well, because he said he's very firm. He wants a ceasefire. At the same time, the positions of both sides, Israel and Hamas, haven't really changed. So it'll be really curious to see, or I'll be really curious to see what they actually managed to agree to.
It does feel like there's a lot of a PR exercise here, Bernd, as you were saying, doesn't it? I mean, and also that announcement during the week that the US was to give $30 million to that very, very controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which, the United Nations, 150, 160 humanitarian organizations, many other countries in the world are fundamentally opposed to the operation of. So you would imagine that will be high up on the talking points agenda for Monday as well. Well, talking points on the agenda. It's a holiday weekend, so we will be talking no more after a while. Talking about Independence Day, one of the best movies of all time, can I say?
Amazing movie.
I love that. Probably hasn't aged very well. I don't know. I haven't watched it in a while.
It hasn't.
I might crack it out this weekend.
Special effects are a bit weak looking now, but other than that, I think it's still great.
Yeah.
All right,
Well,
great to see you guys.
yeah, happy 4th of July.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
And you can catch up with all of the episodes of The President's Path on the BBC iPlayer if you're in the UK, and on BBC Sounds, which is available globally.
Just search for The President's Path. It'll be under the global story banner for Sounds users.
Each episode will be published at the end of the week.